Welcome in! Latest episode, That SEC Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Bratton. Go by SEC Mike on the Twitters. And there he is, our great friend, Mr. Steven Lassan, the senior editor over at Athlon Sports. Hope you had a great Merry Christmas, Steven, and looking forward to New Year's full of college football playoff action.
Absolutely, Mike. I had a wonderful holiday. I had a great Christmas. I hope you did as well. Hope all the cousins had a great time with all the food, all the family. I ate entirely too much, but I watched some great football over the weekend. So I'm fired up for the quarterfinals. We got some bowl games, got some transfer stuff. So, Mike, as you know, there is no slow moment in the world of college football right now.
Right. And we got all these games coming up. Now, I should probably update this. It's two of these games already been played, but we got playoff action. And why don't we just throw the friggin' transfer portal free agency on top of it all? So, Steven, I've asked you to come prepared. We're going to do a deep dive on the transfer portal. Steven is going to preview these playoff games and give us his predictions because the game will be here before you know it. What is it? Wednesday. The playoffs are right back into action. So, we got a lot to get to, but before we do that, Steven, as always, got to remind the cousins that we're brought to you by MyBookie this football season. It's still time to get in on the action over at mybookie.ag is the website, promo code SEC. They'll give you a $500 of bonus money if you sign up and use that promo code SEC. Free money, Steven. You lose it. Well, if you listen to Steven, you'll just double your money. You listen to Shane or I, you'll lose that money, but it'll go right back in your account. But only if you use that promo code SEC over at MyBookie. So get in on the action while you still can. And then, Steven, New Year's right around the corner. I don't know about you, but I'm going to be drowning my sorrows if the SEC gets eliminated here with some King Snake, our great friends over at Tennessee Legend, the official spirit of that SEC podcast. Shout out Tennessee Legend, 2 locations in East Tennessee, Sevierville, and 1 in Nashville. So go check them out and let them know that we sent you. And they got a little bonus gift for you. So go check them out. Tennessee Legend Distillery. And Steven, you are a legend for all this work I asked you to do for the freaking transfer portal, because I don't know how you're doing it with all this, everything that's going on, all this nonsense. Coaching changes, players jumping in and out of the portal. So let's go. We got so much to talk about. We're going to hit on all 16 SEC teams. But the big news today, Steven, was Mr. Coleman, outstanding receiver out of Auburn. He's already listed by, I think it was 24/7 I just saw, as the number 1 prospect in the transfer portal. First of all, would you agree with that? Do you think Coleman? I know quarterbacks. Maybe that's not fair because quarterbacks, how important they are to the game. But maybe moving aside from anybody that is in dire need of a quarterback, is there a better prospect right now in the transfer portal than Coleman in your mind?
Mike, I don't think so. I think Coleman is going to command a lot of dollars at the receiver position, and rightfully so. He is ridiculously talented. We have seen the kind of acrobatic catches that he's made. I also think that it's pretty impressive, the production that he's had the last 2 years, given the inconsistency at quarterback for Auburn. So I think the talent is there. You'd be banking on, this is kind of like an elite receiver hitting the transfer portal. And if you need somebody to go out and make plays, like you said, I think quarterbacks are obviously the most important position in the portal. There are so many of them that are kind of like, it's almost like, if you think about the amount of quarterbacks and the talent that's there, there's a pretty good talent to entries ratio. Like your ratio of receivers and defensive backs typically have the most entries into the portal. But there's not a lot of guys that look like Coleman and can play like Coleman. So, Mike, I think 5-star elite addition into the portal. Very fascinated to see where he ends up this year.
Yeah, and I always caution people. I mean, I don't know if they want to believe it or not, Steven, but, I think the number one thing when it comes to the portal is money. And if you don't believe that, I think you're just naive. But so I say all that because I do think that'll be the ultimate decider in nearly every decision that's made via the transfer portal. It is what it is. I just tell it the way it is. But that, having said that, Steven, just a quick heads up to the cousins. So he committed Coleman to A&M prior to enrolling at Auburn. Of course, that was under Jimbo, different era. But he was recruited to Alabama by Mr. Holloman Wiggins, who is now the offensive coordinator at A&M. So there's a lot of connections to A&M for Cam Coleman. And, of course, they got the money to pay him. And I just thought this was interesting, Stephen. Marcus Davis, a name to know if you don't already. He's an outstanding position coach. He was Auburn's receivers coach. He just got hired, Stephen, at Florida, I believe, under John Summerall. So he's the new receivers coach at Florida, if I'm not mistaken. He's a hell of a coach. So there's connections to Florida. There's connections to A&M. I think Cam Coleman, we're going to find 6 degrees of separation for every program. I mean, if they're smart, they've got him on the line. So let me ask you, Stephen, having said all that, best fit for Cam Coleman in the SEC next season if that's the route he goes?
Mike, I think there are kind of like 4 programs that immediately came to mind here for me for Cam Coleman. I think the first is pretty obvious. Like if you're Texas, you got Arch Manning coming back next year. You got Ryan Wingo, pair him up with Cam Coleman. Like go out and get that elite number 1 receiver, because you start thinking about if you only got 1 more year of Arch Manning, you've got this window of opportunity. Don't you go all in for 2026 and try to get back to the playoffs? So I think Texas jumped out to me. Like you said, the connections to Wiggins and Texas A&M make a ton of sense. Concepcion is gone, bringing back Mario Craver. You get a lot of catches, a lot of opportunities there. You could use another big play receiver to help Marcel Reed. So I think the 2 Texas schools, Texas A&M, hard to write off Georgia and Alabama, though, in this too, because Georgia is going to lose some weapons. Zachariah Branch, maybe some other ones. You look at Alabama, Jeremy Bernard is a senior. Ryan Williams needs to be more involved. Like, how does that receiving core shake out in the future? With that offense and the track record of DeBoer and Grubb, I think I would keep them in the mix too. But this kind of feels like just from the outside, things like Texas A&M might be the 2 front runners if you had to pick a school in thinking about Cam Coleman's future.
Just don't go to Ohio State, please, for the love of God.
Jeez, talk about good luck defending them next year, right? You did mention Florida, and could you imagine a trio of receivers like Dallas Wilson, Vernell Brown, and Cam Coleman? Now, of course, the quarterback is a big concern, but Buster Faulkner, I think, would be able to figure out some ways to get good quarterback play and to get the ball to those receivers, right?
Oh, yeah, no doubt. So, I don't know. It's going to be very interesting to see where he went or where he decides to go. Now, I may have screwed that up because they're telling me, no, I don't think I did. No, Marcus Davis is for sure. He's the new Florida receivers coach. Gavin says he's Bama's, but no, he's not. He's not Bama's receivers coach, to my knowledge.
Isn't that Derek Nix is going to Alabama?
Right. Yeah, and Derek Nix, I think, was he the receivers coach at Auburn? I thought he was running backs coach or something like that.
He was running backs coach this year, offensive coordinator.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a confusion. Receivers
coach at Ole Miss before that, though. So
right. Michael Dunlap, appreciate you. He says Nick Harbor and Cam Coleman. Come on now. So this is what we do, right? Everybody's elite player in there. Can we get him? I saw an Arkansas account say, "Hey, should we go get him?" And I'm like, buddy, if you think you can get him, good luck. Because again, he apparently had a offer around $2 million to come back to Auburn, and he's hitting the portal. So,
what's it gonna take to get him 3?
I don't know, but and I have. Let me say this too, Stephen. Let me know if you agree, and feel free to disagree, because I always prefer when these guys stay, because I like when they have a legacy, and I like that. I think we all like it when you grow up and you're rooting for these guys and you see them as freshmen, you want to see it all the way through, and you want that guy to be a legend at your school, right? And unfortunately for Auburn, that's just not going to be the legacy of Cam Coleman now. But can you blame him? I mean, specifically this situation, because we don't know who the quarterback's going to be. Certainly it looks like it's going to be Brown, but it's going to be a new system. It's going to be a new coach. The system is not, it's a damn fine system. I'm not held at half the conference is running it now. I'm not knocking the system. It's going to be highly productive, but does it get you ready for the NFL? Now, again, it's at the end of the day, I know people harp on that. That's not the job of these coaches. The job is to win football games. So does it develop you at an elite level? Not necessarily. Did he sign up for this coach? Does he even fit the system? You know, there's so much uncertainty there. I think if you're Cam Coleman, you probably want to go somewhere. Obviously, you're going to go somewhere where you can get paid, but I think you really want to play somewhere where you can showcase your skills at the highest level. And by that, I mean a team that has playoff aspirations. What's your thoughts on all that?
Mike, I like you, I do wish a lot of times when we get this transfer portal season, it's like, man, it'd be nice to go back to the days of the rosters where it's like you knew about 95% of the rosters like in January, right? And you knew like there'd be some attrition here or there. I forget which year it was when I looked at my spreadsheet. I think there was like 100 transfers in college football. And it's like you get 100 transfers in an hour right now. The game has changed so much. And so when I think about players like Cam Coleman, it's like it would be great if they stayed around. They could be part of the rebuilding process. And I get it. Like why fans hate this stuff because like, I mean, you go down the roster and like see like 60, 70 new players on some of these teams. Like as a fan, it's very difficult to know from year to year, and you're used to that thing where you bring somebody in as a freshman and they develop. So I get all the frustration. But I think it's someone like Cam Coleman's case, you're looking at is like maximizing value for 2026 in the NFL. Where are you going to go next year that's going to, number one, give you a big paycheck? And there's nothing wrong with that because that's the game, but also preparing you for the NFL. And also, how do you go win a national title? Because he's played for 2 years at a pretty iffy offense at Auburn. He's dealt with a lot of stuff. And now I think he's cashed in 2 seasons, Mike. It's like, if I'm an Auburn fan, I'm like, hey, thank you. You've given us 2 years. Now go get your big NIL check and go chase your national championship because you're right. I mean, with Byron Brown likely coming in, new system, new offensive line, it might be a struggle. And so while you could go get $2 million at Texas and catch passes for Arch Manning and go to the playoff. Like I totally understand it. So I think this is about, for all these players, especially in the case of Coleman, maximizing your value when you've got it, use it as leverage, get to the portal, and then find a way to make the playoff. And then you're also enhancing your value for the NFL, trading out some unknowns for some knowns potentially with maybe Arch or Marcel Reed next season.
Wow, Stevie, to call Auburn's offense the last couple of years iffy, that's about as diplomatic as it gets because it's been complete horse shit is what I'd call it. But again, yeah, you're the more diplomatic one of us. But yeah, I think you nailed it there. Well said, as always. But let's get into this, Stephen. So I also asked you to come prepared. We're going to hit on all the teams. But before we get into a team-by-team needs, I just thought it would be kind of fun to discuss the top 10 biggest needs via the portal in the entire conference. So, Stephen, would you like to share? I think it would be kind of fun if we start at 10 and work our way down to number 1. And I know we have a couple that just missed the cut. So could we start with the ones that just missed the cut for you?
Absolutely. Mike, we've got a handful of these team needs that just missed the cut here. And should say, Mike, with 16 teams and a lot of roster turnover, we could have went several different ways. So let's start with one of those teams that I think is going to be an interesting team to watch this offseason with the freshman quarterback and Jared Curtis. And that's Vanderbilt's offensive line. Losing potentially 4 or 5 offensive line starters, how do they rebuild that group around the young quarterback? So Vanderbilt's offensive line just missed the cut. A lot of new faces. I do think it is going to be very difficult very difficult in the portal to bring in multiple high-level starters. So I'm interested to see how Vanderbilt molds and adapts this group. One of the other offensive lines that we want to talk about is South Carolina's offensive line, because new system, turnover, we've already seen some transfers and departures there. How do the Gamecocks improve this group? It's struggled the last couple of years. They've got to be better here if they want to maximize the talent of Lenora Sellers. So Vanderbilt's offensive line, South Carolina's offensive line just missed the cut. Also, Ole Miss wide receivers. And Ole Miss is one of those teams, Mike, that's going to be hard to figure out as we go forward because there's a big unknown at quarterback. There's some potential guys who could enter the portal elsewhere, and of course with Lane Kiffin at LSU. So Ole Miss receivers with potentially 3 or 4 top guys off to the NFL and departing. That's a position that they've lost guys in the past and reloaded. Suspect they're going to have some turnover through the portal as well. Also, Missouri's wide receivers. We've done a good job the last couple of years. Theo Wees, Kevin Coleman. That's a group I suspect they will need to go out and get some playmakers, especially considering they've lost guys to the portal already. And Mike, on the defensive front, there's 2 teams. One of them's a playoff contender next year, and that's Oklahoma. Our Mason Thomas is gone. They're going to have some guys, obviously, that defensive tackle could be gone too. So how does Brent Venables reload this defensive front? I trust him to find the right guys. Do they look into the portal? Why it's not the top 10 is probably because we just trust Brent Venables to kind of figure this out. And the same thing could be said over at Tennessee, Mike. Defensive line, a lot of guys are gone. New system coming in. You could also throw defensive backs at Tennessee in there as well. So I know I'm throwing a lot at you, Mike. Any of those really jump out to you as like massive needs that you're watching?
I mean, all of them. But what in particular? I saw a stat the other day, Steven, and I believe it came from Pro Football Focus. I'm not 100% sure, and again, I'm not a huge fan of that outlet to begin with. But the statistic, and I've referenced it a couple times on this show, maybe even with you and I on here, but in the entire Power 4, there's one quarterback that has ranked in the top 2, both this year and last season, for most pressured quarterback in the Power 4 in the nation. Do you know who I'm referencing there?
It's got to be Lenore Sellers, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You nailed it. That's why we call you the encyclopedia over there. But point being, Steven, we need to give this man some help. And I think it's fantastic he's coming back. I think that's exactly what I want to see. I want to see a legacy of him being a Gamecock, and with Kendall Briles coming in there, with offensive line coach Randy Clements coming in there, I'm pretty confident this thing is going to look significantly better. But it won't if the offensive line doesn't come together. So I think that'll be paramount. And we're getting this guy killed for 2 years in a row. We should thank our lucky stars that he's still upright. You know what I mean? Given that statistic. So let's give this man all the help we can up front. And if we can nail down just 5 capable linemen in front of them, they don't got to be all Americans. They just got to be capable. I'm very eager to see what this South Carolina offense could be.
I think South Carolina has allowed like 84 sacks over the last 2 years combined. And also you just look at those rushing numbers this season, they were at the bottom of the SEC. So Mike, I think one thing that's really interesting about Kendall Briles and Randy Clements is that they've kind of been almost like tied together. They were, I think, at Florida State together, and they've been elsewhere together. And I like the fact that they can almost like immediately mesh. Like they know the system, offensive line coach, they're working well together, and maybe that helps. And especially with the sort of tempo and sort of style and sort of like easy throws, easy things you can do in this offense, maybe it alleviates some of your offensive line concern. But I do think in the big picture, Mike, you're 100% right. It's great to have Lenore Sellers. It's great to have Nick Harbor back, but they've got to have help around him. And it starts with up front, being able to run the ball better and being able to protect him. Because if South Carolina can do that, I think they could absolutely just get back to a bowl game and think bigger next season than beyond that. But they've got to get this offensive line fixed. And maybe the good news is if you can just find 1 or 2 of the right guys with some of the maybe returning pieces that you have, some scheme tweaks, maybe this hits off right away. So they are definitely going to be an interesting team. They're off to a good start. I think they're one of the offseason winners so far, what they've done coaching wise.
And let me ask you this, Steve. This is something we were kind of talking about off air, and what little teaser for your top 10 here. But you referenced Tennessee We haven't got to them yet, but it's Tennessee. But you did reference Ole Miss and what the uncertainty there with Trinidad Chambliss and his petitioning to get another year. And even if he gets it, he may not be Ole Miss quarterback. But I think it's kind of more important for Tennessee. I mean, it's important for LSU or potentially LSU. So the status of that waiver, not only does it affect Ole Miss, it potentially factors at LSU. So very tricky situation here, very convoluted question. But if you're Ole Miss, if you're LSU, and now Tennessee, who's awaiting Joey Aguilar and his waiver, how would you handle the situation given that the portal opens January 2nd? I mean, this is right around the corner here. Let's say we do not have a resolution to Joey Aguilar's status or Trinidad Chambliss status. What does Steven Lassan do if he's running the Ole Miss, LSU, or Tennessee roster collective, whatever you want to call it?
I almost think you have to assume you will not have them for next season. I think the good news is there's over 100 something quarterbacks in the portal. There's obviously a very high end group to that, like the Sam Levitts, the DJ Lagways, some other guys, potentially Drew Mestamaker of North Texas. There's the high end tier of quarterbacks. I think those are going to go off the board quick, though. Next week, it would not surprise me to see those dominoes start to fall into place. So I don't know that you can necessarily wait around. I think there was hope that there would be some clarity maybe before Christmas, and that hasn't come around yet. So as much as it'd be nice to have an answer, I don't think there's going to be an answer. So I guess my answer to that would be I'd probably plan on them not getting it. Do you think that's the right approach on that one?
Yeah, because you can't be left without a quality quarterback in today's era, not when there's options out there.
The other thought would be the NCAA keeps losing so much in court that they're probably likely to lose again here, which means those guys will be available. So, but you're right. I think if you're Lane Kiffin, if you're Josh Heupel, and I think quarterbacks go off the board probably the fastest, because once one falls into place, the next one, you can see these teams, it's basically working down the list. Once this guy signs, the next one's here's the offer, sign it or we're moving on. And so you can't get left behind in the portal era of quarterbacks. So I guess for Tennessee and I think for LSU and Ole Miss, I think I would want to have some clarity by Friday or so, because if not, you got to move on to some other options.
Right, and shout out SEC Sean, because I think we have officially reached the point where we ain't never taken a freshman kicker. Some of these schools will, I don't want to call any of them out, but there's a couple above our head that may take one. But if you're trying to compete to win this league, to win a national championship, I think every year you're going into the portal, unless you already have a kicker, obviously. But if you don't, I think you're going in the portal. You're getting someone that's proven at this level that he's competent, regardless whether he's one and done. We can just do one and done every year at kicker. Do you think that is a fair assessment?
Yeah, I do. There are a handful of kickers that will probably enter the portal that are probably high-level guys. We saw it this year with Sandell. We've seen it with some others in recent years. There was actually a really good FCS kicker that entered the portal from North Dakota State last week. So I suspect there will be a handful of them. I will say there's probably not as many. The ratio to entries versus high quality guys is always smaller. With quarterbacks, there's probably 20 to 25 out of that 100 that I would consider guys you could probably start in the SEC and feel good about. Whereas kickers, the ratio is a little bit smaller. Doesn't mean there's not some guys who, with the right coaching, couldn't be, making 50, 60 yarders like we see elsewhere. Ask me next week, though. That answer may change depending on what happens in the portal.
Okay, so let's get into your list here, Stephen, of top 10 transfer portal needs out of the Southeastern Conference. These are the biggest needs Stephen sees that your team may, or if your team's on this list, definitely needs to add at this position. So who you got at number 10?
Mike, this is a team that we talked about just a little bit ago. It's the Auburn Tigers. And basically, this is offense, and it is the quarterback position, it is skill talent at receiver, and it is the offensive line. We saw this week or over the weekend, Connor Liu, potential starter somewhere on the offensive line next year. He entered the NFL draft. There is a lot of seniors that are departing. I think they could have basically 5 new offensive linemen, especially with Xavier Chapin hitting the portal. You add that uncertainty up front. Cam Coleman is gone. Malcolm Simmons, Perry Thompson, Horatio Fields. That's 4 of your top 5 receivers have entered the transfer portal, and there's uncertainty at quarterback. We think it'll be Byron Brown, but who's he going to throw to? Who's going to be blocking for him? And we talked about the offensive line. I think it's going to be tough to find 5 starters that are high-level guys in the SEC. I think we have seen that. If there is one constant, you can kind of find 2, maybe 3 guys, but having 5 seems like a lot, doesn't it, Mike?
Yeah, and shout out cousin Emily. She's not in here, and I wouldn't touch this show either right now if I was an Auburn fan. But shout out to those great fans. But yeah, I think they are the only team in the conference. I could be mistaken, but I believe they're the only one, Stephen, that has to replace quite literally every starter on the offensive and defensive line following this portal. And you nailed it. Yeah, I mean, the receiver that many people have is the top player in the portal. No quarterback. I do think they are getting Brown. I mean, the coach, he's been going around telling people they're adding him for weeks. So I can't imagine that they don't get Byron Brown, who I believe led the nation in. I saw some statistic. You maybe correct me if I'm wrong, Stephen, but I think he led the nation either in touchdowns or total yards or something like that. I know it was South Florida, so it's not quite as impressive as doing that as at the power level, but I'm sure he can play. So I don't know. I will say this, Stephen, because again, it's easy to make fun of Auburn. Hell with it. I made a career off it this offseason, but I will say I would rather have Alex Golish and a retooled roster. We may not know their names. They may not be high-profile players. Give me that over a top 10 and paid roster. And damn, Hugh Freeze is our coach. We'll do better. We'll do better with option A. I don't care who we're lining up with. Can't be as bad as when we had Hugh Freeze.
Mike, I 100% agree. I would suspect that Alex Golish is going to do I would say he'd do a similar job of talent identification and getting that talent to Auburn. I suspect that he's going to do a much better job of actually developing that talent. And so that's why receivers don't necessarily worry me as much as the quarterback and offensive linemen do here. I think Byron Brown is going to be solid for that, and having a quarterback who's basically, he knows the scheme, he knows the system, he just slides in day one, helps you kind of speed up that process. I think the offensive line is my greatest concern. You could also look at it as this system might do some things to kind of maybe mitigate some of the offensive line concerns. But I do think as basic and as cliche as this sounds, as much as we talk about quarterbacks and receivers and all that, it is still a line of scrimmage league. And if you got to replace your entire offensive line and so many faces on defense, Keldrick Falk and some other guys, the rebuilding process may take a little bit longer than I thought at first. When Golish was hired, I thought there was a chance to maybe hit the ground running if they could keep some of those pieces. So, but I think big picture, I trust Alex Golish, and I think they'll figure this out. The offensive line is probably my biggest worry spot right now.
All right, so who's number 9 on your list, Stephen, of the biggest portal needs in the Southeastern Conference?
It's got to be the Florida quarterback situation, Mike. And I think there is one quarterback that has been tied to Florida, and that is Aaron Philo, who played at Georgia Tech the last couple years. He played as a backup mostly to Haynes King this year. But if you want to be intrigued, go back to 2024 where he started and also played while Haynes King was banged up. They kind of had a 2-quarterback system going at Georgia Tech. I like Aaron Philo. I think it'd be great to get him because he's basically a 1-for-1 fit. He knows the offense, and you speed up that rebuilding process. Do you take another guy? Do you think he's a high enough level starter in the SEC? I think that's the big question for Florida. Losing DJ Lagway, I know maybe the play hasn't been consistent. There's been some interceptions. He's been banged up. Maybe we haven't seen the best of DJ Lagway yet. I think he's a pretty big loss. And for a quarterback like for a coach like John Summerall, if you want to get your tenure started off on the right foot, you got to nail a quarterback. So I think that's why Florida's number 9 on our list. Just a lot of intrigue for this first-year coach.
Yeah, better bring back Jaden Baugh, though, because or then running back's an issue. And I think there's confidence there, Stephen, that they're going to keep Dallas Wilson, right, the true freshman, who was outstanding against Texas. Really didn't make much of an impact otherwise due to injury. But there's some rumblings that I've heard, Stephen, that A&M is trying to get him. So it's going to be a battle there. And that's the tough spot of being in the portal, right? Particularly for a player like that who's young, who's relatively unproven. But when he is on the field, looks arguably like the best player on the field. I guess one of the maybe a top 5 roster in college football. So, you can make the argument, pay him what he wants, but can he stay healthy? So that's an interesting spot for Florida. Florida's got a lot to answer here.
Mike, I think there's something I would also watch next week when the portal opens is, you're seeing a lot of these retention announcements, which is great for guys like me and you because we appreciate it that we know this guy is re-signed for next year. There's no question about it. But I would also watch when the portal opens, watch when that first wave of players hits, then watch the commitments, and then watch what other players have not announced that they are retained yet, because there's some leverage there. And so you mentioned, just mentioning like Dallas Wilson as an example, if he's not re-signed, somebody misses on a receiver, you can bet there's going to be a lot of money thrown around to some of these guys that maybe are not as committed or as retained as we thought. So there's a lot that is going to play out over the next couple of weeks in terms of roster management. And in a place like Florida, if you do retain Wilson with Brown coming back, I think you feel pretty good about your weapons. It's just that quarterback spot. And of course, you got to fill out the offensive line with Slaughter and I think Barber also not coming back next year.
All right, Steven. So who's number 8 on your list? Biggest portal needs in the SEC.
Let's stay on the offense. Let's talk Oklahoma receivers, Mike. They are number 8 on my list. So big picture here, this is just getting John Mateer some playmakers. That we saw this year, coming into the year, they tried to upgrade at the receiver and tight end position through the portal. Probably need to do this again. Need to give Mateer just better weapons across the board. Satanga may be back, maybe not. This need could get greater if Oklahoma cannot retain him. Just looking at their seniors and depth chart, guys like Deion Burks, Lewis Gibson, they're all listed as seniors. We'll see what happens with waivers and eligibility and who's back. I also think Oklahoma could probably use a tight end or two that's actually like a real tight end and could help a little bit with blocking, maybe do some other stuff at the line of scrimmage. So I think this is about potentially filling out your depth chart with losses, but also getting your quarterback help, and which helps him raise his game to the next level. Is that fair?
Yeah, and I struggle with this one, Stephen, because it's not that I disagree with you. I think Oklahoma significantly needs to upgrade at receiver, help around, like you said, Satania, if he even comes back. But tight end specifically, they truly need help there. But I'm a big believer, and I don't know if this is running back, I don't know if this is offensive line, it's probably both, that they've got to get the ground game going. And maybe, maybe they can't, the whole thing doesn't work because maybe there's lack of respect for the receivers, and the tight ends. Again, other than Satania, and I know Deion Burks, he kind of came on late, but he never quite lived up to the billing either. I'm not saying he's a bad player, but the production wasn't quite there. I know injuries were a factor in that as well. But I don't know what the real answer is, but we got to be able to run the football. If for no other reason, then we can't have John Mateer being a battering ram, who I believe he had. I may have this incorrect because I'm not looking at the stats, but I think it was something like 8 less carries than than Blaylock, who led the team. So I mean, it was essentially like they had the same amount of carries. You just can't do that in this conference, particularly as we're going into a 9-game schedule.
Mateer led the team with 149 rushing attempts last year.
Wow. Okay.
One name to watch, and maybe this conversation kind of it all kind of goes together. But we saw Caleb Hawkins, the running back, transfer from North Texas, enter the portal. He's an Oklahoma native. I think it's very easy to kind of do the dots here. That Oklahoma, I think there's some talent in that running back room. Could they upgrade? Could they look to add some playmakers there? I think he'd be an obvious fit if they do. But I think you're right. There's the offensive line that's got to take a step forward, and there's the rushing attack. And if they can do that, that helps Mateer, take some of the pressure off. It helps elevate his game, makes it a little bit easier. But it also does feel like they've had a lot of injuries there. And with some of those guys being banged up and the departures, they're just going to need more depth. They're going to need some more playmakers to help that offense continue to kind of grow, especially as like you said, 9 games in the SEC. They've got to have Mateer healthy for that entire season. I love the way that he was thrown with extras. Seemed like velocity in the playoff. Can you get that for the entire season? Because if you do, you're going back to the playoff next year. So I kind of think there's this question on supporting cast is like a production on rushing and also help at receiver. Those two things kind of go together.
All right, so where are we at? We are at number 7, Stephen, and your biggest portal needs in the SEC. Where are you going?
Mike, this position might dictate how much Tennessee Legends Cousin Shane is going to consume next year, right? Let's talk about Tennessee's quarterback room, because it is fascinating, because you said it at the top. Joey Aguilar has that extra year potentially. You got Faison Brandon coming in, potentially the next star quarterback for Tennessee. We've already seen Merklinger transfer. Got McIntyre coming back next season. There's a lot of unknown here. And so Tennessee's got a pretty bright future with Brandon, but the question is for 2026, is he ready to take the reins from game 1? Or do you need to go out and get a quarterback? And I think Tennessee should go out and get a quarterback, if nothing else, to just bridge the gap. Maybe it's a senior who's got 1 year of eligibility, and he's also proven. And so you get him to bridge the gap to the younger quarterbacks and allow them to kind of grow into the job. So Tennessee's quarterback is number 7 on the list because of the intrigue and potential to be a player for one of the top names in the portal.
Now, could you argue, though, that the defense is a bigger need for Tennessee? Hiring Jim Knowles, I'm already starting to hear some of the players at Penn State, maybe targets for Tennessee, because they're familiar with the system. I see what you're saying with quarterback, and I don't disagree with anything you said there, but could you make the argument that Tennessee's got a bigger need on defense?
I think you could, just from the standpoint that you trust Heupel, right? He got Joey Aguilar. He was one of the top, quarterbacks in the SEC in terms of production. Maybe you don't have to go out and get a DJ Lagway, Sam Levitt, Dylan Raiola. Pick your top transfer quarterback. You could go get one of those guys from the second tier, and you trust Heupel to figure it out. Like, he's going to get enough production to win you games. But if Tennessee's going to be back in the playoff, they've got to fix this defense. And you just go look at the departures that are anticipated on the defensive line. There's potentially 4 or 5 key guys that are gone. The injuries in the secondary this season, guys going to the NFL. You're also, depending on where you look, Jim Knowles runs a 4-2-5 or a 3-3-5, however you want to categorize it. Either way, you need a lot of defensive backs to run that system, right? So I would say yes. If you're banking on Heupel coming through essentially at quarterback, defense is the greater concern up front and in the secondary.
Hey, shout out to Wildman Carl. Appreciate you with the donation. Dating myself. Any combo guys like Billy Kilmer, who I just looked up, he's 86 years old. I think he beats 2-way players. Yeah, well, I mean, we had a Heisman guy, not Travis Hunter, do that, not that. And any of these players could go both ways?
That's a good question. We haven't seen any major guys yet that kind of can play both offense and defense at the portal, unless somebody's entered the portal like in the last, hour or so, I don't think yet. But I think he does bring up a good point. Is we are kind of seeing this a little bit more in college football today, which is there are some guys that they'll kind of sprinkle in, like Coy Parrish at Minnesota. He played last week on December 26th. He plays safety, he plays receiver, he plays kick return. He's not going in the portal, but like that's the kind of guy you could see, especially like with NIL dollars. It's good for these guys to get exposure on offense. They get a handful of touches. They could be promised there. So I could see a handful of guys maybe being that 5 to 10 snaps a game on offense if they are like a star safety corner, if they are really dynamic, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Now, was that even one of the deals with Caleb Downs? I mean, he's arguably the best player in the country. And we were told, who was it? Brooks Austin, I think, said, hell, Ohio State's going to let him play running back. And maybe, they clearly didn't need him. They had quite the running back combo last year. But if maybe the best pound for pound player in football can't go both ways, I don't know. That's a tall drink of water. You know what?
Travis Hunter is really special in terms of athleticism, the ability to play both receiver, corner, and also the stamina to play that at both sides of the ball. I think that's probably unlikely. What I think you might be looking at is, like you said, is there somebody who could play 5 to 10 snaps a game at running back? Are they a defensive back who comes in, plays receiver, and you get them specifically involved because they're so dynamic? It wouldn't surprise me also, because of Travis Hunter and what he did, that more players don't try to do that over the next 5 to 10 years, because that might be the NIL thing for some of these teams. Like, hey, come over, we'll play you 10 snaps a game at receiver, right?
All right, so let's go on with your list here, Stephen. Number 6, which biggest need in the SEC in the transfer portal?
Mike, let's talk about Georgia, because I think this is a team that has a pretty strong case to be the number 1 team potentially next year. And there is one spot that I've got my eye on in this portal season, and that is receiver, because Zachariah Branch could be gone, Colby Young, Noah Thomas, Dylan Belt. 4 pretty prominent players in that lineup could all be departing the receiving core. So how do you build around Gunnar Stockton? We also see last offseason, Georgia's not going to just add 15 players. They're going to be very strategic about who they go out and get. So I mentioned receiver here because that's kind of the one spot where you look at this team and say, next year, they're going to be losing 3 to 4 guys potentially. Branch could go to the NFL. How do they fill in those weapons around Gunnar Stockton on a roster that's ready to compete again, potentially for the national championship?
Yeah, wasn't it interesting, Stephen, where they're not a huge NIL, well, I shouldn't say NIL, portal team, that's going to offer a ton of NIL. I think they spend the vast, vast, vast majority of their NIL on maintaining their roster, as they should, because they have an elite roster year after year because they recruit so well. But this last offseason, they really went heavy and added Branch and Noah Thomas, and all of a sudden, and they kept Colby Young and Landon and all these guys. All of a sudden they've got, arguably the best all-around receiving core, to where they can go to the 6th guy, the 7th guy, and I'm throwing tight ends in here as well. And we're always used to them being a defensive juggernaut, which they kind of are by the end of the year. But they struggled so much with that at the beginning of the year, and it was the offense that was carrying them early in the season. So I know each year's independent, and I wouldn't necessarily read anything into what they did last offseason means for sure they're going to do this season. But I'm sure they're glad they did that. And that's what it's all about, right? Adapting. That's why I think Nick Saban's the greatest of all time, because he was running I formation, pro style, brings in Lane Kiffin. Despite his antics, they had a lot of success. You know what I mean? So, and then they go, Sarkisian, tempo, and all this stuff. So you have to keep adapting. And it certainly seems like Georgia's adapting a little bit more to this transfer portal era. And again, they're not gonna go full Ole Miss here and just do a portal team. But if they have a spot on their roster that doesn't look elite, they are more than willing and capable to spend to shore that up.
Which is probably the perfect, if you could give every coach some truth serum, that's probably the way you want to do it, right? You want to really build the roster through recruiting, retain your guys, develop them, and then go out and strategically target some needs. It's almost the transfer portal. You'd like to treat it like the NFL draft and treat it like a luxury. We don't necessarily have a major need here, but if we could get somebody that helps us, then we're golden. And so I think when you think about Georgia for next season, there are some quite like maybe there could be an offensive tackle that goes to the NFL. Maybe there is a spot on defense that is a need. We saw this last year. They went out and got Josh McCrary to be kind of a short yardage power back. They went out and got Mendoza, the edge rusher at linebacker. They will strategically target like specific positions of need. So I think when you see the guys that they're losing, they've got to go out and probably get a couple receivers to bolster that group. I suspect their defense is going to be, again, very, very good next year. But if you want to help Stockton continue to grow, maybe potentially win the national championship, you're probably going to need a couple playmakers there. So I would suspect Georgia's very small on the quantity of transfers brought in, very high on the quality of them, because they won't look to bring in a massive portal class here.
Mm-hmm. All right, Steven, top 5 here. Portal needs in the SEC. Who's number 5?
Mike, let's go to Alabama, because this team is going to have some holes to fill if it wants to get back to the playoff next season. So obviously there is a big question at quarterback. Does Ty Simpson come back? Is it Keelan Russell? They're set at quarterback, but where they might need help is going to be on the offensive line. So Alabama at 5 is all about line of scrimmage plus linebacker. Because if Kalen DeBoer wants to get Alabama back to the playoff, there are a couple of major holes here. Defensive line, especially, LT Overton is gone. Tim Keenan, also a senior. You look at linebacker, Deontay Lawson, Justin Jefferson. There's several key players on the defensive front. Throw in Caden Proctor, Parker Brailsford. On the offensive line, potentially gone. Some turnover at guard. You're looking at a lot of new faces, and for as much as it's nice to have the flash at receiver, you also got to have that line of scrimmage. So I do suspect that Alabama will probably be looking into the portal for some help along the line of scrimmage and maybe an experienced linebacker or two.
Yeah, and you hit on something very interesting, Stephen. Ty Simpson, what does he do? His season, let's hope not for us. Let's hope his season doesn't end here this week, but it very well could. Man, you got to go quickly to figure out. Now, he may have already figured it out. I don't know. But he's not publicly said what he's going to do, nor should he before his season comes to an end. But that's a tough spot to be in with a portal opening. And if you're Kalen DeBoer, right, again, you did reference it. They got Keelan Russell, but I don't know. I mean, what if the number one portal quarterback says, it's been my dream to play for old DeBoering. I know it's DeBoering. He's not an entertaining guy, but he does know how to coach these gunslingers here. And I don't know, that it's interesting, isn't it, Stephen, where, a decision and even if it's not bringing in a quarterback to guaranteed be start, maybe just be a depth piece or something of that nature. I don't know what is what's his name? The Mac?
Austin Mack, yeah.
Austin Mack. So, what does he do? Does he go in? I don't know. It's very convoluted. Again, even if you're not talking a starter, you may need depth, but maybe you don't if Ty Simpson's back. And if Ty Simpson's back, maybe Keelan Russell goes in the portal. I mean, there's just so many dominoes here.
Yeah, there really is. I would say, just thinking about the NFL draft a little bit, it was supposed to be a really good quarterback class in the summer. It doesn't necessarily look that way right now. I think Fernando Mendoza is kind of the odds-on favorite to be the first quarterback off the board if Dante Moore from Oregon goes back to school. So essentially, if you start thinking about how the board could play out, Ty Simpson might end up being the second, third best quarterback in a first-round pick because teams are desperate and everybody else is coming back to school or underachieved this year. So that quarterback domino for Alabama could have multiple effects. It's for Alabama. It's what does Keelan Russell do if Ty Simpson is back. I would also throw in running back too. Because I think Alabama's got to get a difference maker or two here because of the lack of balance this season. I know they probably feel maybe better about some of the younger running backs on the team. I still think you got to get somebody who can make turn a 5-yard gain into a 35-yard gain, break off a long touchdown run or two. So really, you trust DeBoer and you trust Ryan Grubb to figure this out, but there's a lot of questions here as we start to look at what Alabama's offense could look like next year.
Mm-hmm. All right, top 4, Steven. Who's number 4 top portal need out of the SEC?
Mike, every time I feel like I check the transfer portal entries, I feel like an LSU offensive lineman is entering the portal. So it's LSU's offensive line. It's LSU's offensive line for 2 reasons. Number 1, it struggled this year. Number 2, they're losing a lot, and I suspect Lane Kiffin is going to go out and find some guys that he likes to fit his system. So LSU has got a lot of bodies that it's got to find to fill out that offensive line room. It's a little concerning to me to see the attrition, and especially given that it is hard to find high-level starters that can come in and start multiple ones in the SEC. But I think it's got to be this offensive line. We're going to get to some other LSU talk on this top 10 list, but I think this offensive line is very important for Lane Kiffin in year 1. And certainly the quarterback is as well, but those 5 starters up front are a massive question right now.
Yeah, and the schedule certainly doesn't dictate roster decisions, I wouldn't think. But Clemson week 1, at Ole Miss week 3, Texas A&M week 4. Thankfully, week 1, week 4, those are home games, and throw in Louisiana Tech in there. But point being, Stephen, where, if offensive line, defensive line, what have you, if it's a struggle, you could drop a game we project you to win. It's just point being, they got to get the line of scrimmage up to speed pretty quickly here if they're going to be competitive.
100%. Maybe the good news for Ole Miss in that schedule, for LSU in that schedule is Clemson has a rebuild defensive front, in Penn State with its, mash unit of players just pushed them around in the bowl game on Saturday. So, and we know Dabo's kind of allergic to the portal, right? So,
I was about to say, baby Dabo's about to turn a new leaf, Steven, and just re-inject this roster with some elite talent via the portal.
Mike, he might have to, because there's a lot of questions about that Clemson roster going forward. And of course, they just fired Garrett Riley, their offensive coordinator. So this LSU team will be looking at a lot of new faces at Clemson next year. But you're right. I mean, facing SEC defensive fronts at Ole Miss, Pete Golding's going to want that game. And then, Texas A&M, although they have some turnover, they will find out the right pieces on that defense. So I think all the focus is going to be on who is the conductor of this LSU offense, and rightfully so. But I think given that schedule, given the 9 games in the SEC, it's hard. LSU found this out this year. It's hard to hide a bad offensive line. So I think that I'm going to be very curious to see how many high-level guys they can get into the portal and make them day 1 starters.
All right, so now we're into the top 3, Stephen. Who is number 3 biggest need out of the SEC in the transfer portal?
Mike, we just talked about one of those teams, and that's Texas A&M. It's the Texas A&M, let's call it line of scrimmage, because this was one of the best offensive lines in the country this year, and they're going to have some turnover on the offensive line. Looking probably about 3 out of the 5 offensive line starters are gone. And then on defense, Cassius Howe, Dayon Hayes, you look at a couple guys on the interior of the defensive line, there are some massive losses in terms of contributions, in terms of snaps, but also high-level play that Mike Elko is going to have to replace. Throw in wide receiver with Casey Concepcion, gone to the NFL, and I think A&M is going to have to be very active in the portal to fix both of those needs if they want to get back to the playoff in 2026.
Yeah. And that's a big reason why they made the playoff this year, Steven, because they had a lot of older linemen, particularly on the offensive line. And they evaluated and did pretty well on the defensive line after losing, 3, I believe, draft picks on the defensive line of the NFL. I thought that would be a huge, huge issue. And it was a strength this year. So, Yeah, I think you nailed it. A&M's got a lot of needs on that line of scrimmage, and when you make a playoff, people are going to get pretty upset if you don't make it the next year. As impossible of an ask as that may seem, they've really got to nail it there if they're going to make a run like that again, though.
Maybe one check in Texas A&M's favor ought to be that Cassius Howe was a transfer from Bowling Green. Deion Hayes kind of bounced around. Onyedem was at Iowa State. They've done a good job of. They've had needs on the defensive front, and they've been able to fill them. And we saw that last year with Concepcion and Craver. They had a need at receiver. They went out and targeted two guys, and they made a big difference. So I kind of trust Elko to figure out the defensive situation. I am a little bit more concerned about the offensive line, just because if this team is going to get back to the playoff, it feels like Marcel Reed's going to have to elevate his game to another level. And that starts with figuring out receivers outside of Concepcion. You got Bethel Roman, but the offensive line, because you were so, the trenches were so solid this year, able to run the ball. If you're not able to do that next year, it's more pressure on Reed. So how does that work out? So I think line of scrimmage entirely, I think you feel probably a little bit better on the defensive front just because your track record.
When you said one check in A&M's favor, I thought you were going to cite oil prices or something like taking it to the bank. You know what? But that's where I thought you were going. But hey, speaking of money and money to be spent, who's your number 2 portal need in the SEC?
Mike, it is the Texas Longhorns, and it is the offensive line, because we saw this year how questionable, how iffy, how shaky, whatever you want to put the offensive line for Texas, it was a massive issue. And so protecting Arch Manning is priority number 1. It felt like it took Texas 8 games this year to figure out offensively what they want to be. But I think we saw the sort of the best of Arch Manning down the stretch. There's a lot to build on there. But if they can't figure out the offensive line, and if they don't solve this group in pass protection, and if that doesn't help this team get a better rushing attack next year, then they're going to squander another season and not be able to get back to the playoff, because Arch Manning is going to start next year as one of the top 10 to 15 quarterbacks in college football, and Texas better take advantage of that window of opportunity here. So it feels like getting the offensive line back on track to protect your quarterback, but also to get the run game going and give him that balance that was missing this season.
And getting rid of PK is going to fix all the offensive line issues, Stephen.
Of course, because Sark's going to go work on the offensive line in between the breaks, right? Instead of calling coverages.
I had to throw that shot out there. All right, so number 1, Stephen, number 1 portal target or portal need in the Southeastern Conference. Where is it?
Let's go back to LSU. And this is perhaps the biggest need, but also the biggest area of intrigue, because we talk about quarterback dominoes and you're trying to figure out, okay, where could DJ Lagway end up? Where could Sam Levitt end up? Where could Trinidad Chambliss end up if he's waiver plus portal? It's got to be the LSU quarterback situation. Michael Van Buren, I thought, all things considered, had a nice outing in the Texas Bowl. My guess is Lane Kiffin is probably going to be looking to bring in a high-level starter at this position. So, yes, offensive line is a massive concern, but the quarterback situation with Kiffin and who he brings in to pilot this offense next year is number 1 on the list.
Yeah, Kiffin left before the game was even over. So, good luck, Michael Van Buren. He's not a fan, apparently. Mm-hmm. Leaving, he probably had to go steal some more trash cart or grocery carts. But no, I think that is huge. And again, that's why I referenced Trinidad and his waiver. I mean, I've been hearing for about a week, hey, it's right around the corner. But he was even asked, I believe, today about it and said there's not been an update to his knowledge. So we are getting down to the 11th hour. A decision's got to be made, and it's certainly not helping. It's not helping that there's no certainty there.
Do you think Kiffin maybe just left early because he had like a hot yoga session like at 5 a.m. or something? It was pretty late, the Texas Bowl was.
Hey, that's a good point. I didn't even think about that. Maybe these football games conflicted with his yoga schedule, but You might be onto something there, Stephen. I really do think.
Mike, I think that is a strong possibility. Perhaps maybe he was inquiring about the waiver status of Trinidad Chambliss after watching LSU's offense in the first half. But LSU, I think, is probably the most interesting team to watch when the portal opens up in all of college football, because I don't think it's any secret they're going to have the dollars to spend on whatever they need. Kiffin has navigated the portal well at Ole Miss. I suspect he's going to do that at LSU. I'm sure they spent the last 2 to 3 weeks kind of plotting out who they want to go get and what they're going to do all behind the scenes. So there's a lot of work to do on this team, but also I think just given his track record, I think they're going to make a lot of splashes and this roster is going to look a lot different come January.
I think you're right, Stephen. I also think that Junior is right for gifted 5 memberships. Thank you, Junior. I got him listed down here, Stephen. He gifted By Hinton, Colt 45, Hooked on ATX, Carter Man 7709, and Chris Camp. You've all been gifted thanks to Junior. And then we had the legend Steven Up. He gifted a membership too. We love all Stevens here.
Always showing up for them boys in Tuscaloosa. It's Steven Up. Roll Tide.
He gifted Sam Sharrock, and then JR the legend.
Legend, cousin JR has done it again.
Thank you, JR. And this is the coolest one yet, Stephen. Bubba of Bayou Labatre. I'm sure I butchered that. But all of y'all, welcome to
the family.
Yeah. And Stephen, you know, we're right here. We're right here at the playoff time. Right here with bowl time, basketball time. If you haven't already, you want to go to one of these games and you want to save some money, go check them out. SeatGeek, SeatGeek.com, promo code SEC10 to get 10% off your full order at SeatGeek.com. Again, with that promo code SEC10, or just download the app. And same deal, SEC10 on the app. Doesn't cost you a thing. And in fact, we're trying to save you money here. And as Cousin Shane would always say, I don't think he's not even explained it, I don't think, to people, but he always talks about the concession prices. People are probably like, why in the hell is this big bastard talking about concession prices when we're pitching SeatGeek? Because they give you an overview of the arena, where your seat is, how close it is to the concession stand. So if you go with Cousin Shane, you can feed that big son of a gun. So go check them out. SeatGeek, promo code SEC10. All right, so we've hit on all the biggest needs, Stephen. But
Mike,
how about
did Santa drop off some SEC bowl game tickets to Cousin Shane? Maybe the Music City Bowl?
Hell no, unless it's in his little neighborhood. He ain't getting his ass to one of these games. I hate to say it, but when it comes to the biggest portal needs, Stephen, of the teams we have not discussed. Let's say like Arkansas, who man, they're getting, new coaching staff, a lot of guys hitting the portal, which that's understandable. Rough year, lose 10 games in a row to end the year. Let's dive into where are the biggest portal needs for Arkansas as we enter the portal here.
Mike, I'm going to say this, and I don't mean this to be snarky or anything. I do think pretty much everywhere on the roster ought to be up for grabs. Because you look at what Arkansas is losing, they're going to lose some key playmakers at running back and receiver, Fernando Carmona, Corey Robinson on the offensive line too. And Quincy Rhodes was an absolute stud this year for this defense, a great player on a bad defense. If they want to get back on track quickly, they need to add multiple players on defense everywhere, defensive line, linebacker, secondary, because they cannot go through another season with that defense giving up 34 points a game. So I know it's a little vague, but I almost think when Silverfield was hired, he picked the 2 cornerstones like KJ Jackson, Quincy Rhodes. I would not be surprised if they have like 60 to 70 new players on this roster just based upon the turnover from last year and what we've already seen in the portal. So it kind of feels like everywhere is a need, but if you really wanted to drill it down, I would say defense, defense, defense. Hit it hard and get better right away there.
Does it serve them well at all, Stephen, with Ryan Silverfield that he was at Memphis, and I'm sure they never didn't they add a ton of guys via the portal, and even this last offseason. But I would imagine being a coach, and this is no shot at Memphis or any of these schools, but literally any of them that have any good players, they're all getting rated by power conference teams. So he's got to have a good pulse on identifying talent via the portal and recruiting them to Memphis, and now have more resources at Arkansas. How well do you think that serves him in Fayetteville?
I think it serves him really well. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I think the stat is they had 70 new players on the roster at Memphis this year. They were actually pretty solid too. And so I think he has done a good job of navigating that roster chaos through the portal. And I think it's going to get harder, of course, in the SEC to out-recruit some of these big-time teams. But I think a coach that has navigated these waters at the G5 level, where every year you're losing 50 to 60 players, where guys are graduating, you're also losing guys to power conference teams. If you can navigate those waters and still put out a respectable team, you're not intimidated. You're sort of just understanding that, hey, this is the waters that we're in and we got to play in it. I think Silverfield did a nice job there. And that's why I know maybe the results at times at Memphis, were a little frustrating to Memphis fans, as far as maybe they underachieved a little bit. But I think he's off to a pretty good start. And I think his roster management, if I'm an Arkansas fan, would have me confident that this roster is going to look a lot different come next season, and also be in a better shape than it is right now.
Mm-hmm. All right. Hey, how about another one where we're trying to retool a roster under a new coach? We haven't discussed Kentucky at all. What would be some big positions of need for old Will Stein and company as they put together their first Wildcat roster?
I think the one thing that we know about Kentucky's got to be the quarterback spot. I think Cutter Boley seems to be pretty set there. So I think you've got to do two things. I think, number one, build around the young quarterback. I think Kentucky needs playmakers at receiver. Like, they need guys who can be difference makers in the passing game. Also, 4 of their 5 offensive line starters were seniors. And so I think they've got to solve offensive line and receiver to help out Cutter Boley right away. And Mike, you could also look on the defensive side. They lose key contributors at defensive line, linebacker, and defensive back. So I would say almost everywhere is probably a need. But if I got my centerpiece in the quarterback, I want to go out and get him some help right away, and that's offensive line and receiver.
And shout out to a friend of the show, Nick Roush, over at Kentucky Sports Radio. He made an interesting point on Twitter that I saw today, with LSU seemingly losing literally everybody off the offensive line to the portal. Hey, offensive line coach Joe Sloan, where's he at now? He's at Kentucky. Again, I don't know if that's necessarily a fix to the woes, because they weren't exactly productive at Baton Rouge. But hey, Kentucky needs help, and there's a lot of guys that Joe Sloan has got to be pretty familiar with. Would be crazy to see some of those guys end up in Lexington.
I agree. I think anytime we start to get into portal season, you're looking to kind of connect the dots. And so someone like Sloan going to Kentucky, and some of those offensive linemen, I think, are probably, certainly I think LSU could play a lot better than they did this season, sort of kind of connect the dots. It's very easy to go out and get some SEC caliber linemen from LSU who you already have a connection with. So if Kentucky can do that, I know there's going to be a ramp up period, but I do kind of trust Will Stein from an offensive brain trust perspective. I haven't necessarily loved the staff they put together, but I sort of trust him to help Cutter Boley raise his game, and also maybe find some guys at receiver, running back that can be difference makers, and then they can figure out the offensive line too.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, hey, I know the focus for Ole Miss is more the Sugar Bowl than anything, but we know them, built through the portal here. So they got entire staff already looking ahead to the transfer portal, no doubt. What would be the biggest needs you think for Ole Miss?
Mike, I have quarterback written down as sort of, the great unknown here. What happens with Trinidad Chambliss? What happens with Austin Simmons? It feels like Ole Miss is probably going to be fine at quarterback, but it is something that's going to have to be sorted out. I think beyond that, they're losing a lot of guys at safety. I think their top 3 starters in the secondary at safety are seniors. You also look at the offensive line too. Both tackles likely to depart, and there's going to be some losses, like we talked about at receiver as well. So feels like a team that's got a lot of needs, but we've also seen that before, and they filled them. So feel pretty confident in Ole Miss to fill those needs. But I'm got my eye on offensive line, safety, and receivers, and then watching what happens at quarterback for Ole Miss.
And I don't think anything's a given, Stephen, but I think with Kiffin gone, I think Austin Simmons more likely to actually stay now. If he stays, do you think they need to add a depth piece at quarterback, or do you think you roll with Austin Simmons next year as your starting quarterback?
I would probably add a depth piece. I think if you can find somebody who's not, I mean, I was almost going to say if you could find another Trinidad Chandler that's like under recruited and it could be a high upside guy in your system,
Right.
but also, Austin Simmons, I think that the upside for him is intriguing. I just think we haven't seen it over the full season. And so you want to have like a fallback option should maybe Simmons get hurt, maybe he doesn't reach his potential. So yes, I think Ole Miss should absolutely add another arm or two to its quarterback room if they lose one of Chambliss or Simmons there.
All right, so staying in the state of Mississippi, what about Mississippi State, Stephen, they've got quite a few needs themselves. Where do you think is their biggest portal need?
Mike, this might be boring because it's almost copy and paste from last season, but it feels like line of scrimmage, right? Because you got to protect Kamario Taylor. It looks like they're going to probably lose 3 out of the 5 offensive line starters. Blake Steen likely to come back from injury, so that does help some of the concerns up front, but also defense. They added a lot of guys on this defense last year. They were still last in the SEC against the run and near the bottom of the conference in sacks. So I would like to see this defense continue to bulk up the talent level, especially in the trenches, and then on offense, do the same thing. Give Kamario Taylor some help in the trenches, which helps Taylor and also helps that running game. If you bring back Bothwell and Booth to go with Taylor and the weapons they could also bring back at receiver, that offense is going to be cooking next year, but they got to get better on defense to get to a bowl game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that. Now, what about Missouri, Stephen, who I think any Missouri fan that watched that bowl game will tell you, buddy, we need us a quarterback. But they're at an interesting spot, right? New offensive coordinator, Chip Lindsey. Matt Zollers was a borderline 5-star recruit. Certainly doesn't look like it yet, but hey, year 2 is when these guys make a huge jump. I think you almost have to bring in a quarterback, but what's your thoughts on that situation and the biggest portal needs for Missouri?
Mike, I think you have to bring in a quarterback. I think we probably haven't seen the best of Zollers yet. That's just, he was thrown into a tough spot. He was supposed to be the 3rd quarterback this year. You add in some injuries. I think he'll get better with a full off season to work. But if you're Missouri, I think there's a risk of, okay, if you do go all in on him and he doesn't hit, you're going to be in a pretty bad spot next year. So I would find somebody to compete with Zollers, at least push him, somebody who's got some veteran experience. I think outside of that, I would like to see this team find some help for its quarterback too. We know there's going to be some turnover on the offensive line. Does Caden Green go to the NFL? Going to find some playmakers at receiver. Already a couple guys transferred. Kevin Coleman, we'll see. I think he's a senior too. So there's going to be some turnover there. You guys have turnover on the offensive line, and you got a quarterback that's got, less than, 6 starts to his resume. It feels like there's a lot of supporting cast needs for a staff that has done a nice job of finding replacements every year. So I think there's some trust factor here with Drinkowitz, but quarterback really stands out to me as a major question mark for this team right now.
Mm-hmm. All right, Stephen. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we basically hit on every SEC team and portal needs. Are there any other thoughts that you have for any of these teams when it comes to the portal?
Mike, I think one thought on the portal is I would not overrate or panic necessarily if I'm one of these fan bases next week. Like when all these guys start to depart, because the rosters every year was 60 to 70 players, I wouldn't hit the panic button yet. Let's see what happens when the dust settles in a few weeks, how different these rosters are. Also, I think you have brought this up every offseason. Sometimes it takes half a season. It takes a year for some of these portal guys to really click. So I think there's going to be a handful of guys that we target right away and say, he's going to make an impact. He's a day one guy. But there's going to be a lot of guys there's a lot of hype for, and they don't show up until November next year because it takes them a while to work in this system. So I think there's some intrigue there, but also, Mike, I think in the big picture, as we talk about this, it does feel like there's a lot of playoff teams and potentially a national championship caliber team in Georgia next year and Texas. They got some big needs to fill potentially. And so how those dominoes fall, I know you don't like to hear this, Mike. It might help the SEC keep up with the Big Ten on the field.
And remember, as always, Steven, every guy we lost, dead weight, was holding us back. Every guy we get, massively underrated. Key to the turning around the program. You know?
Yep. Also, beware of, well, he was a 5-star coming out of high school and he hasn't made an impact in like 2.5 years. So he's going to be the guy that turns around the program. So, yes, I like those commandments of the transfer portal you brought up.
Yeah, give me a FCS All-American over a 5-star that has done jack in college football, because what you really want, you want a productive player. I know FCS, that's kind of a little bit of an outlier. That's not exact, but like an all-conference at Sunbelt or something like that, that's how you get in there, and those are the real players, I think, that have a lot of value.
Ahmad Hardy comes to mind right away. One of the best G5 running backs in the country. He looked pretty good for Missouri this year. It is an interesting kind of debate as to whether to take potential or production. And I would always value the production side of this, unless it's somebody that's maybe like a first-year transfer. They were as a freshman, they sat on the bench to develop, and you see they needed a year when we were scouting him in high school. I'll take him now because by year 2, he's going to be better. But I think going production over potential has proven to be the way to go when it comes to the portal, because there are so many unknowns with these guys.
Man, you're just giving Missouri fans flashbacks. That was another drinkism. Production over potential. It didn't quite work out though.
It didn't work out. I will say, Mike, I don't know that I know Missouri is getting a lot of grief from fans in other conferences about a bowl loss to Virginia. And I don't know how much I'd read into these games. These are just exhibition games. I wouldn't hit the panic meter. My panic meter is very low on these losses, by the way. I don't know if that's fair or not, but
you just sound like an SEC honk now, Steven.
Mike, I'd be sitting here saying that if I was a Conference USA, Big Ten, ACC guy. I love all bowl games. I have watched every second of them all. And when I turned the TV off, I didn't make any sweeping generalization about a game. I just said, man, that was either a great game or that one was pretty one-sided. It was just an exhibition game with a lot of players out, coaching changes, transfers. I just don't know what to make of these. I just think they're really just kind of like preseason games at this point.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what's not a preseason game, Steven, and that's this clash we've got in the Sugar Bowl between Ole Miss and Georgia. Round 2. First one was a classic here. Georgia 143-35 in Athens. But man, did Ole Miss come out hot. Scored on the first 5 possessions, cooled off significantly in the fourth quarter. That's a credit to Georgia's defense more than anything. But, man, what a game we got here, Steven. And the winner will advance to the semifinals, right? So what's your thoughts on Ole Miss, Georgia, as we gear up for the Sugar Bowl here in just a couple of days?
Mike, I hope that this game is just like the first game and that it goes down to the wire, the last few possessions, because man, that first game was a classic. And so I'm hopeful that we get a kind of a back and forth affair. Probably not as high scoring this time, but I'm hopeful that we'll get a 4-quarter clash between these two teams. I think the biggest storyline for me is obviously Ole Miss without Lane Kiffin, because Pete Golding passed the first test with flying colors. He pushed all the right buttons. That was Tulane. This is Georgia. Nobody thinks Ole Miss is going to win this game, right? So in some respects, Ole Miss can play the disrespect card. They're not getting any respect. Georgia's a touchdown or so favorite. All the pressure in the world probably should be on Georgia. So Ole Miss can go into this game and play them pretty loose. But I think this game could really come down to kind of one thing, and that's like a style question for me, because we saw Georgia's defense get better over the course of the second half of the season. Their pass rush got better. They weren't giving up as many big plays. The first game we saw Ole Miss, move the ball, like you said, early on, pretty much at will. If Ole Miss is able to do that again, I think they can win this game. But I wonder if the style question plays out as Georgia rushing attack gets going, defense holds up, and this game plays out a little bit differently, which is not the way that Ole Miss wants the game to be dictated. Do you think that's a fair way to kind of sum it up?
Yeah, and that's exactly where I wanted to ask you, Stephen, because you referenced the first game and how fun that was, and it'd be great to see another showdown like it. But the likelihood that actually happens, I don't have a ton of confidence in it because of exactly what you said. Georgia's defense playing out of their minds, the best they've played, and Lane Kiffin not being there didn't hurt them at all against Tulane. And it may not hurt them a ton in this one either, but you certainly, I think you'd rather have him than not for a game of this magnitude, and his ability to make adjustments in game is relatively unmatched. Maybe it is unmatched on the offensive side of the football. So, yeah, I think there's a lot that goes against Ole Miss in this one, but that's not to say they can't win it. But let me spin it to you this way. What's your thoughts on Gunnar Stockton, who he's playing well, but Georgia Tech was not great performance. Alabama statistically was a great game, but I don't know. I didn't think he looked like $1 million necessarily in that one either. But if it is high scoring, and it's a showdown, Trinidad versus Gunnar, do you have confidence in Gunnar Stockton to outgun Trinidad essentially?
I think I do, Mike. I think there's one kind of theme that I think we should kind of tackle about this matchup, which is the teams that had the bye week last year didn't fare very well. And one of those teams was Georgia. Of course, they had the backup quarterback. One was Boise. I think the seeding was screwed up. So that it's better now. Does it hold up, or does the time off hurt some of these teams? Ole Miss has played a game recently, probably not as much rust. I actually thought that Gunnar kind of stepped up like at the game's biggest moments. Like if you think about the Tennessee game, you think about the 3 touchdown performance through the air against Alabama, and also the 4 touchdown performance against Texas. It felt like when the lights were the brightest, it felt like Stockton stepped up. I'm skeptical that Ole Miss is going to be able to stop Georgia's rushing attack just stone cold, which makes me think that it's not necessarily going to be on Stockton's shoulders to win this game. They're going to have that balance. What I do think is, you brought up something about a higher scoring game. And I think if I'm Ole Miss, I actually want this game to be higher scoring, because I kind of trust that, hey, Chambliss and these playmakers, we can move the ball probably pretty much as if we're moving it like that, we can do that for 4 quarters. I think Georgia would kind of prefer to turn this into kind of a lower scoring, a little bit more of a physical affair. Do you think that's kind of a fair way to sum that up?
I do. Yeah, I think that is certainly something to watch here, but I also wonder, it's funny you mentioned that, because it was last week. My thing was home teams never lost in a playoff, Steven. So I'm rolling with Oklahoma. I'm rolling with A&M, and we saw how well that worked. So yeah, to your point, it's a short sample size. The seeding was screwed up. But I will have my eye on these teams: Indiana, Georgia, who else? Tech, and Ohio State. How do they perform following the long layoff. I think that is a big storyline going into these matchups because it's nearly a month without playing football. Even if it's, let's say we only get peak Georgia for a half. Now that may be good enough to win because peak Georgia is damn near unstoppable. But if Ole Miss, if it's peak Ole Miss for 4 quarters and Georgia for 2, I think Ole Miss can win this game.
I do too. I mean, I think Ole Miss can. I think there's almost too many people just writing off the chance that Ole Miss has to win this game, and I get it because Kiffin's gone. You got a first-time head coach who's learning on the job. Their defense, I think there's a lot of skepticism whether they can slow down. Georgia, we saw Tulane have success moving the ball, but can you count on turnovers? Probably not in this matchup. So I get the skepticism. I also think, hey, they've played these guys one time. They took them to the wire. That was in Athens. This time it's going to be probably a little bit more. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of Georgia fans. There's going to be a ton of Ole Miss fans too. So you kind of look at it as like, hey, we've already played these guys once. We took them to the brink. Everybody's disrespecting us this time. We've got Trinidad Chambliss. We've got all these receivers. If we can get this game into a higher kind of pace on our terms, Ole Miss has got a shot to win this game. I think Georgia's favored and rightfully so. But if there's a rust factor and Ole Miss comes out and jumps on the board and scores 2 touchdowns right away, man, if I'm Georgia, I'm getting really nervous, even though it might be early in this game.
Yeah, but and this is something we talked with Shane yesterday, but it's hard to imagine a more lopsided coaching advantage in a game of this magnitude when it comes to Kirby and Pete Golding. And that's with me liking what I've seen from Pete Golding, but it's just been so brief. I mean, it was just like, I really do think last season against Notre Dame, I think Kirby got out coached pretty bad. Now, he had a tragedy and his father was essentially on his deathbed. So I think that's excusable. So, but in this matchup, as much as I've liked what I've seen from Pete Golding, I can't imagine he's going to outcoach Kirby.
I agree. I think it's tough to see that. I think for Georgia almost too, it's like avoiding that 3-minute disaster that we saw against Notre Dame, whether it was like mistake after mistake and it kept spiraling. And I think the danger is it's hard to see that happening again. But if it does, if Ole Miss gets a couple mistakes and all of a sudden they're up 17 points, they're up 21, it's going to be harder to come back against them because Notre Dame kind of played the style that Georgia needed to. Whereas Ole Miss, you're going to be going up against some high-powered offense. So I suspect that the teams that had off weeks will be a little bit better this year than they were last year because we did see, I think back to that Rose Bowl game with Oregon and Ohio State, and it felt like Ohio State was like moving faster the whole game. And it was like, man, I know Oregon's not this slow, right? And it just felt like it took them like a half to sort of knock off the rust. And so I do wonder, okay, could there be some early rust for Georgia and that benefits Ole Miss? But maybe as the game kind of settles in, that coaching edge that you talked about, like Smart, you trust him in the spot, that shows up for Georgia here too. It's tough to see Pete Golding out coaching him, but maybe the other side of that is there's nothing to lose here for Ole Miss. No one expects you to win. The disrespect card, Pete Golding, just let it go. I mean, throw every trick in the bag out there and try to beat Georgia and move on to the semifinals.
Do you put any stock in Georgia kind of having this big game experience? And I'm talking playoff, or is that perhaps overrated? Because I know, last year they were in the playoff, but if you think back to I don't know how many players were even on this team that were on the national champion, and certainly probably didn't play much of a role. Does Georgia get a massive advantage in terms of big game experience over Ole Miss, or not so much?
Probably on the coaching front, like you said. I think with these rosters pretty much duct tape year to year, I think you're getting some teams, Georgia's probably, and this is true with Ohio State, they excel at the roster retention part of this. But you're right. How many guys played way back in the national championship game are still playing on that roster now? There's not many. Like if this was a 4-year kind of thing in the old days of college football, I would give them an edge. But I mean, these two teams, their rosters change so much from year to year. But also, I mean, Ole Miss went on the road and won at Oklahoma. They went on the road and won at Mississippi State. Like when their back was against the wall in key spots, they responded. They played well against Georgia the first time. I think you got to give Georgia the big game experience edge just because of Kirby. But also, I don't think Ole Miss is necessarily intimidated in this spot either.
Mm-hmm. No, I don't think they will either. And I think they'll be playing with house money going into this matchup. And I also, let me know if maybe you disagree with this, but I think Ole Miss, and it probably will be slight, but I think they will have a edge in the crowd because Georgia was here last year in this very same venue, and they've had so many of these games. Their fans are probably looking ahead to the next game, which I believe is in Phoenix. Whereas this one is a little bit closer to Ole Miss. They've literally never been in this spot. I just think Ole Miss will have an advantage in the crowd. Probably not enough of one to make a huge difference, but if it is 75-25, then it could be a real advantage. Do you think Ole Miss could have an advantage here?
That's a good point. I think if I'm a Georgia fan, and I'm probably the most optimistic Georgia fan, you're probably sitting at home saying, why would I want to go to the Sugar Bowl when I could save money and go to the next game or the national championship, right? Whereas if you're an Ole Miss fan, they were just in the Sugar Bowl a few years ago, was it playing Baylor? But also like these high profile spots where they're in the mix to be making the semifinals hasn't happened. Like Georgia's kind of been here and done that. This is a big spot for Ole Miss. So I could totally see that. Like you get a more of a pro Ole Miss crowd because of the Georgia's fans maybe expecting to win. Whereas Ole Miss fans got to be pretty excited to go to the Sugar Bowl and a chance to go to the semifinals.
Yeah, no, I can't wait for it. All right, Steven, are you prepared to give us a prediction for this game?
Mike, I am. I think Georgia wins again. I think we get a pretty good game. I don't think it's necessarily as high scoring as the first one. A couple things I'm watching for Georgia. Gabe Harris, the status of him, is dealing with an injury, but also looks like Colby Young might be back on the offense. He was out of practice. So maybe some good, some bad news there for Georgia. I just think that Georgia they seem to be peaking at the right time. And I like the way they played in November. The Georgia Tech game was kind of one of the games that they didn't play their best. But I think defense ramping up at the right time, the pass rush, the secondary, and also I think the way they can pound away at this Ole Miss defense. If Ole Miss cannot stop the run, that sets up that efficiency we see out of Stockton, and I think they'll take control of this game. But I like Ole Miss to hang in there. I think it's a good game into the fourth quarter, but I like Georgia 31, Ole Miss 24.
And what would happen? What would have to happen for Ole Miss to pull that upset? Because again, you got a touchdown game, so it's not like it would be a wild upset or anything. But we just, what would have to happen in this game for the Rebels to pull it out?
I think one key has to be Keywan Lacey. He only had 31 rushing yards in the first game on 12 carries. I mean, I think he's got to be way more involved, but also way more productive this time too. The other thing is, I think there's a trade. Like trade 3, score 7. Because I think if this game is like in the 40s again, it's only going to come down to a couple stops. I don't think it's going to, but I think if I'm Ole Miss, if I can say, look, we can't stop Georgia every time. Their rushing attack is just too much for this defense. But we'll trade. We'll give up. We'll let them bend between the 20s, and then we'll get tougher in the red zone, and we'll give up 3. But Chambliss scores 7. And so you're kind of getting into this game of where the margins mattered. Margins mattered in the first one, where Georgia just got those timely stops, scored in the end. That's how I think Ole Miss could win. I know it's basic, but it's almost like Chambliss has to be at his best. Got to get Lacey going, and then timely stops on defense, red zone, third downs, and turnovers. I think if Ole Miss can win some of those timely stops, I think they got a good shot to win this game.
They're in the comments, Stephen. They're saying, Stephen, please call Mike a dumbass at least once. So if I say something dumb, feel free to fire that at me for just for their sake. But let me ask you this: what is more important in this game specifically? Would you rather win the first quarter or the fourth quarter? Because again, what happened earlier doesn't necessarily have any reflection on this game, but Ole Miss won the first quarter and Georgia dominated the fourth, and that was the difference. Is it as simple as repeating that? You want to finish strong, but I would be a little concerned if I'm Ole Miss that if we got in a hole early, we may not be able to crawl out of it. So in a game of this magnitude with layoffs and all this thing, what do you think is more important, the fourth quarter or the first quarter to kind of win it?
I think it's the fourth quarter. In one of the things that we probably haven't talked about since the way November went for Georgia was how that stretch of games went, where there was like Auburn, there was the Ole Miss game, there was Florida. It was like every week, throw the Tennessee game in there too early in the year, where it was like this game came down to the wire and Georgia just found a way to win. So I think if you're Ole Miss, yeah, there's something to be said about jumping out and kind of taking control of this game, because it is kind of an interesting battle of styles here. But also I think if you're Ole Miss, you're going to get Georgia's best shot down the stretch because this team has done it week in and week out. So I think if I'm Ole Miss, like if it's a stalemate at halftime and you can take control in the fourth quarter and you don't allow Georgia to have that kind of fourth quarter comeback, you're going to be sitting in good shape to steal this one.
Mm-hmm. Now, I think that's conventional wisdom, and you're probably correct in your answer, Stephen, but I'm going to disagree with you. I think it's more important to come out here, establish the tone, set what kind of game it's going to be, and kind of, if we can jump out to a lead, I think then there's belief, if that makes sense. And again, it's not like they're a 30-point underdog and they need belief here, but I think that would be key to Ole Miss winning. You got to start fast and hope that Georgia starts slow and make them come back and beat you, which they've already proven they can do. So that's not a guarantee that you're going to get a win, but I think that'll be huge in this game. I really do. I think if, like, let's say Georgia's up 14-3, I think this game, it may be over.
I think almost you're thinking about the doubt that could start to creep in because, oh no, Kiffin's not there. Maybe we're not as good. We miss Kiffin, the Charlie Weiss, the play sheet, the list of plays working for Weiss like it was for Kiffin and Weiss together. So I could see that. Like I could see, it feels like Ole Miss is the team that needs a better start. I feel like if Georgia falls behind, I feel like I trust Kirby Smart and that staff to punch back. I feel like if Ole Miss falls behind, I think like if I was to do the confidence meter that you see the win percentage on at the end of the game, it probably would be pretty low because I just don't know how the new staff would respond in this kind of situation and given all that's happened. So I think you're right. Like Ole Miss needs to get off to a good start from a confidence perspective and a style perspective. I think if Georgia falls behind 14-3, probably trust that they can come back and just kind of keep playing their game. Whereas it's going to be tough, I think, if you're Ole Miss to move the ball in this Georgia defense if you're behind 2 scores early on.
Mm-hmm. And final thought that I have on this game with you, Stephen, I think it is, and maybe this is too big of an assumption, but I don't think that Georgia's going to beat themselves. Whereas, and I'm not guaranteeing Ole Miss will, but I think they're far more likely to beat themselves than Georgia is. Does that make sense? And would you agree with that statement?
I would agree with you, although I'm having flashbacks to last year's Sugar Bowl where Georgia melted down in that little stretch before halftime and after, right?
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, that's probably pretty unlikely. Like Georgia, I don't see this game, given the spread, if you gave most, I don't know, maybe most coaches who were assessing this game, my guess is some coaches probably think Georgia could play its B game and probably win here, right?
I think that's fair.
Whereas Ole Miss needs to play an A+. I'm gonna say A+, maybe just an A game. They need everything to go right, I think, to win this game. I think Georgia could overcome some mistakes, but I don't think they're going to beat themselves either.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, how about the Rose Bowl, Stephen? What a matchup here. Alabama, Indiana. We've dubbed this America versus Russia. Choose wisely here, Stephen, as we preview this game. But thoughts on this showdown, SEC, Big Ten, and the Rose Bowl. Man, remember when this used to be Pac-12 versus Big Ten? Those were the days, weren't they? But this is a new era. Now the SEC just gobbled up the Pac-12's rights, I guess, here. But what a matchup here. And, man, is Indiana this are they truly this juggernaut that they're made out to be?
Mike, I think Indiana is very deserving of every accolade that it's had this year. I do think Alabama is a dangerous first-round opponent. Alabama is a dangerous quarterfinal for Indiana. And here's kind of why. Alabama has a ton of roster talent. And sometimes you see this, whether it's in the NFL, we saw it last year with Ohio State, a very talented team that may have had a hiccup or two and maybe isn't playing its best, things start to fall into place. And if you're Alabama, the confidence ought to be, hey, at Oklahoma, we were playing our worst, fell behind 17-0. They found a way to come back. And maybe that offensive spark that we saw the defense get after John Mateer. If I'm Alabama, I might say, hey, this team is going to get hot at the right time. And they're dangerous because they've got a roster talent that rivals anybody in the country. And Indiana's played, they beat Ohio State, they beat Oregon. They are very worthy of being number one. But the layoff, combined with the talent, combined with some of the matchups, if I'm Indiana, it would have been a tough call whether I want to see Oklahoma or Alabama. I think Alabama's got some ingredients that's going to give this team some trouble.
Can Alabama win it if they are one-dimensional on offense, or do they need to be a little bit more balanced in this matchup?
I think they need to be a little bit more balanced. And so I think we can use the Big Ten championship game as kind of a guide here. Indiana basically shut down Ohio State's rushing attack, which allowed them to put more in coverage to slow down Jeremiah Smith and some of those Ohio State receivers. And they were able to pressure Ohio State quarterback Julian Sayin too. So they really had all those ingredients checked. Alabama's got dudes at receiver, much like Ohio State's got dudes. And so I think if you can get a little bit of balance going, you make Indiana have to respect what's going on up front and with that rushing attack, I think that only opens up some plays downfield. And I think that's what makes Alabama kind of a dangerous opponent here for Indiana. What if Ty Simpson gets hot? What if these receivers start making plays? Like Ryan Williams has been quiet a lot this year, but all it takes is one pass and 160-yard gain, and it can change the whole complexion of a half, a quarter, or anything like that. So I think Alabama's talent plus the pass, and if they get some balance to go with that, I think this is I think if I'm Indiana, this is not probably the Rose Bowl I'd want to see.
Mm-hmm. And do you think there's enough being made? I know I love to make fun of the guy, but big game to boring. Call him that for a reason. But I mean, he's been money in a lot of these marquee games. I know SEC championship notwithstanding here, but he's got an outstanding record against Kirby Smart, Steve Sarkisian, Dan Lanning. And I know Cignetti, he's done a hell of a job. I'm not discounting him or anything, but I mean, I wouldn't be stunned given his track record if he comes out here and pulls out his big DeBoring and just slaps old Cignetti here and Bama shocks the world. I think that will, for people that don't respect DeBoring as an elite coach, I think he is. And I think this is a situation where he could kind of prove that.
I 100% agree with you. And I was going to joke and say, well, he should feel at home, right? Because he did this at Washington when they played like Oregon and Pac-12. He's going like essentially home out to the West Coast to California. And I think it's funny to sit here and say number 1 Indiana and Alabama's the underdog, and to say that Alabama can use the disrespect card, right? But they can't, because I think everybody's going to pick Indiana, and Alabama went on the road last week. They were, depending on where you looked, I guess they were an underdog, slight favorite. When they were down 17-0, don't think there were too many people who thought they were going to come back. So I think, and we kind of saw that from Ty Simpson and some of the players after the game, is, hey, everybody's picking against us. That's been motivation. They won't have to look very far to find the disrespect card here, which is a strange thing for Alabama to say. So I think DeBoer's ability to get the most out of his team in these big spots on the road, before at Alabama, at Washington, Pac-12 championship, playoff, I think he can do that here, but also the disrespect card. I think there's a very, very viable path here for Alabama to pick off an upset.
And I know Mendoza won the Heisman. I'm not saying he shouldn't or anything. I didn't really watch him, so I'm just completely ignorant when it comes to him. But is there a shot that Ty Simpson's a better player let's just keep it to this game, because that's all that really matters. But, would it stun you if he comes out and he's got a better game than Mendoza? Because we have seen it. He about halfway through the year, I thought he was going to win the Heisman. He was looking that good. And he certainly looked like he had kind of returned to form against Oklahoma after the slow start. Would it stun you if Ty Simpson outdueled Mendoza?
Not at all. I mean, we saw him deliver against Oklahoma, one of the nation's best defenses, in the clutch on the road, down 17-0, where everything looked pretty bleak. So now that they've got, some time to prepare for Indiana, there's not a lot of, I kind of worry about rust factor here for some of these teams, but Simpson versus Mendoza is an outstanding quarterback battle. And it's basic to say, but it feels like whichever one outduels the other, given the weapons, it feels like that's the team that's going to come out on top. So I think it wouldn't stun me if Simpson had a great game here and Alabama either won or this game came down to the wire. Both these guys are very good.
And correct me again, I'm virtually ignorant. I've started to watch highlights of Indiana, but I can't claim to be anything of a knowledgeable person when it comes to their roster. But I have heard, Stephen, and again, let the cousins know if this is a fair assessment, that I don't know, now maybe Mendoza, but I don't know outside of him that they have many players where you sit back and be like, oh man, he's going to be a real problem for a team of Alabama's caliber with elite talent. And again, this is not me saying Indiana's bad, but I think it's more the sum of the whole parts than it is any game wreckers on their roster. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
I think there's some truth in the parts thing. I do think individually there are some studs. I think at running back, Roman Himby is very good. They also have another couple running backs they rotate in. I think the guys to watch, though, are those receivers. Elijah Sarrett, Omar Cooper, throw Charlie Becker in there, too. Ohio State's got good receivers. Alabama's got good receivers. These dudes from Indiana can make some catches, too. And so I think if you want to look at the offensive side, that they've got difference makers at running back and receiver. Defensively, what's interesting is Mikael Kamara was a preseason All-American. He was a little bit quiet on the stat sheet. Aiden Fisher is another senior kind of standout. They've got studs on this side of the ball, but I think there's very much and it's not a disrespect thing. It's a very strong collective. They don't have a ton of weaknesses on this roster, but within each position, I think you could find some studs, like whether it's Isaiah Jones at linebacker, Fisher, Kamara, some guys in the secondary too. It's a very, very, they've done a nice job of talent identification and development for Cignetti and these guys.
Mm-hmm. And then how do they line up in the line of scrimmage against Ohio State and Oregon? Because I would imagine those are probably the only two rosters that Indiana played that is comparable to Alabama.
Yeah, this is where Indiana has made the biggest step from last season. If you watched Indiana last year, you might remember when they played Notre Dame. Notre Dame broke off that long touchdown run in the playoff, and that kind of helped to seal the victory for Notre Dame. Indiana has gotten a lot better at the line of scrimmage, both offensive line and defensive line. I think they held both Oregon and Ohio State under 100 rushing yards. They're giving up less than 3 yards per carry. They create a lot of havoc at the line of scrimmage. Their defensive coordinator, Bryant Haynes, might be a guy that gets a head coaching job real soon because of all the looks and pressures and things that they can do. I think their defense is legit. Now, they did lose Stephen Daly, who's one of their best pass rushers. That's something that they will have to overcome. It might be moving some guys around on January 1st. That is a big loss. If you want to look at maybe an area where, hey, they might struggle here. They scored, 30 points against Oregon. They scored 20 against Iowa. They scored 13 against Ohio State. Those are probably your better defensive fronts. And so if there is an area that I would be worried about if I'm Indiana, it'd be, can our offensive line block an LT Overton? Can you block a Tim Keenan? They held up enough against Ohio State. I think this Alabama front on both sides of the ball will challenge them on January 1st.
Mm-hmm. All right, Steven. So, moment of truth. Are you pro-America or are you a communist who's going to pick Indiana?
Sorry to disappoint you, Mike.
Get out of here.
I'm going to roll with Cignetti in Indiana, 24-20. I think Alabama covers. I do think the lack of balance is my biggest concern here for Alabama. I say that and also say, hey, they won pretty much that way at Oklahoma without a tremendous amount of balance. But I think with Indiana's growth on the line of scrimmage, Mendoza gives them a higher upside than Curtis Rourke did last year. I just think Indiana's going to do just enough to get a victory. I don't feel great about it because I think Alabama's a little bit undervalued. They might be getting hot at the right time. I like them to cover, but I'll take the Hoosiers. Sorry, Mike.
And then I heard this as well today, Steven. And again, both teams got to play in it, so I don't know if it's a huge deal, but it sounds like the weather is going to be kind of rough. A lot of rain. Does that do anything for you in this? And even if it's low scoring game or anything like that, does it change anything here?
I don't know that it changes a ton, but it'd be kind of almost crazy to think about it raining at the Rose Bowl, right? I mean, it's usually typically pretty good weather for these games. I think if anything, it might help Indiana a little bit because they've had better success running the ball this year. Full Alabama's defense is I think, a little bit underrated. They played well against Oklahoma last week or 2 weeks ago. I think their front could cause some problems too. But if you had to kind of figure out, okay, in a messy game, which offense could maybe generate a little bit more balance, it's probably Indiana here.
Yeah, so I used to live right near the Rose Bowl. It rained about once a month. Imagine the one damn game out there, one meaningful. I know UCLA plays out there, but those are not meaningful games. But the one meaningful game, and it rains. I'd hate it. You know what?
Man, that'd be a terrible trip. If you're an Alabama fan, of course, they were just out there to play Michigan. But Indiana fans have been just waiting forever for this moment, and it freaking rains on January 1st. So, man, I hope it doesn't do that. I hope we don't have a game that's spoiled by weather. Certainly not the Rose Bowl.
And then you don't have to go on a deep dive or anything because I don't think most of the cousins will care too much about these teams. But do you have any thoughts, predictions on Oregon, Texas Tech, and Miami, Ohio State?
I think that Oregon-Texas Tech game is maybe one of the bigger toss-ups that we've had in the first 2 years of the 12-team playoff era. I've kind of gone back and forth like Tech and then now Oregon. I probably would lean Oregon a little bit. It's going to be interesting to see that Texas Tech defense. It's so much improved. How does Oregon fare against it? So I kind of lean the Ducks in that first game on January 1st, but very much in the toss-up category. The game on December 31st, I think the matchup to watch there, and especially it matters if you're Ole Miss or Georgia. Miami's front just created a ton of havoc against Texas A&M on that Saturday game. And I wonder, just seeing Ohio State's front, they had some issues against Indiana. Does Miami do that again? Do they pull off another upset? Do they advance? Because if they advance, whether it's Ole Miss or Georgia, that front's going to be problematic. So I think just kind of seeing how Miami matches up line of scrimmage wise and seeing if the Buckeyes can get back on track, because they got rolling last year in the playoff. And if you're Georgia or Ole Miss, you don't want them to get red hot again with a matchup in the semis. So I like Ohio State to beat Miami, and I'm going to take Oregon to beat Texas Tech.
Stevie, can you confirm? Cousin Benjamin says Steven has a Hoosier country sign in his house.
I do not have one of those. So.
and do you have the Gene Hackman poster in the background?
No Gene Hackman poster from Hoosiers. No, I do have the movie somewhere in this house. I think. I think I got it like when Movie Gallery was like closing down. It was like $1. You know, hey, it's a sports movie. You know,
no doubt. Well, I appreciate you being a good sport, even though apparently you're a communist. Anything else, Stephen, before we hit to these playoff games? Any final thoughts as we wrap this one up?
Mike, I think, and just enjoy the bowl games. Let's enjoy the playoff, because, man, we're down to the last, 15 games or so of the season. So hope everybody enjoys that, and can't wait to see you guys next year.
Absolutely. And shout out JP. We appreciate you, buddy. Today's shout outs: Junior, Steven Up, Gavin, Michael Dunlap, Cousin JR, and Carl Judkins. Thank you, JP. Thank you to each and every one of you. That's going to do it. We'll be back, Shane and I, tomorrow. We're going to do another watch party for the Tennessee game. Ooh, it's about the only way I can get through some of these bowl games, Steven, is hanging out with the cousins. So that game kicks off 5:30 Eastern, 4:30 Central, a little weird time here on a Tuesday. But we'll be here hanging out. We'd love for you to come watch a game with us. But until then, we will catch you on the next one. See ya.
Hey, buddy, this beer's for you, Mike, and Cousin Shane. That SEC podcast loves the Pirate, and the Pirate loves that SEC podcast. Hail State.